Welcome to the Science for Sport podcast, where we dive into stories and insights that drive peak performance. Join us as we uncover the secrets behind the science of success. Here's your host, Richard Graves.
Hello and welcome to the Science for Sport podcast with me, Richard Graves. This week, we're looking at how you manage multiple teams within one organisation. My guest this week is Luke Harris, the head of strength and conditioning and sports science at Australian A-League side Adelaide United. In his remit is helping develop young players alongside both the men's and women's teams. So how do you go about adapting programs to cater for individual player needs? And what technology does he use to help enhance their performance? Well, let's find out now.
Unlocking sports science to push the limits of human potential. This is the Science for Sport podcast.
Well, Luke, it's great that you've been able to find time and join us on this week's edition of the Science for Sport podcast. I know we've been going back and forth over the last few months as seasons come to a climax and new programs are installed ahead of coming campaigns as well. Over here in England, we're getting ready for the start of the Premier League season. I don't know, obviously in Australia, different seasons, different times of year don't quite marry up. So just bring our listeners up to speed with where you are at Adelaide United and whereabouts in the cycle you are now.
Yeah, so right now we're almost at the end of our youth season. We've got about 3-4 weeks left before finals. Once that finishes up, it'll be straight into the start of pre-season for the women's side. So there's generally about 2-3 days in between the two.
So if you're occupying the position of head of strength and conditioning and sports science, there's not really an awful lot of downtime for you, is there, Luke?
No, not at all. With one program, you can get away with having a few weeks off. With the two programs, generally there's ebbs and flows throughout the season. There's a lot of time where you've got 2 sessions during the day. You might have a gym session with the girls as well. So you kind of out from 6 o'clock in the morning until 8 o'clock at night. And then there's other times of the season where you've only got one team to worry about because the other one's got a bit of time off. So there's fluctuations, but yeah, it's always that way.
Keeps you on your feet, I guess. No 2 days are the same.
No, definitely not. Different athlete populations, different genders. There's a lot of learning curves in between that as well. And then if you go in between the two for one day, you might be working with the women's team in the morning, and then you're working with the youth in the afternoon. You got to like switch between how you deal with athletes. But it's fun. It's good.
How has your approach to the role changed since because it was, I think, September last year that you became head of sports science and strength and conditioning at Adelaide United. Up until then, you'd spent a number of years working with the youth teams. So does that affect your approach to the day-to-day job? And if so, to what extent?
It does and it doesn't. I think going full-time with the women's and the youth programs, it just means like responsibilities that you need to take on are a little bit more extensive. You've kind of gone from, I guess, previous seasons I've been in charge of the youth regardless, but the expectation if you're not there full time isn't quite as heightened. Whereas now you kind of need to be on the ball across 2 different programs. You've got to be able to liaise and contact with external stakeholders and all the coaching staff and all the players themselves. So it's a big undertaking, but it's an enjoyable one as well.
Does it help that you have direct contact then with the head coach of the first team and the fact that they've been involved integrally in recent years with the youth setup as well to align the programme from start right up to first team level?
Oh, definitely. Ayrton stepping up into the A-League full-time and taking on that head role, it just means that the pathways for the youth boys, it's just easier. They've got a direct relationship with him All the staff have direct relationships with him. Kind of mirroring up what obviously the A-League, the men's program do, and what the youth programs do is quite an important factor. So having that close relationship with staff members, and Adrian Stenter, who was the women's head coach last season, is now the assistant coach for the A-League. So having that relationship with him as well just makes it easier when you're working with players that are moving in between squads. We're at the end of our season with the youth. The A-League's about a fourth of the way through their pre-season. So you've got boys jumping between the two all the time. Every week the squads are different because players might go away for a trip for a pre-season game, and we might have players that are dropping down to play with us in the NPL.
What does a typical week look like during the season for you? Because as our listeners will have gathered now, you have an overview of a number of teams. Therefore, there's a number of different demands on your time and different points of emphasis. So I can imagine, unless you've got a good team around you, it can get quite complicated on occasions.
Yeah, it can. I think we've gotten quite lucky in the sense of we've got quite small teams. So for both the women's and the youth sides, they're quite small, they're intimate teams. If you can keep key staff members together, I think that always plays a role in how successful you can be. And our head of medical, head of physiotherapy, she's the head of physio for the women's. She's also the head of physio for the youth now. So having that close relationship with her means that we can keep track of the girls, we can keep track of the boys. We're always in contact. We're seeing each other every single day. So it's you've got to have a close like tight knit group. If you're trying to break it down from a typical week in season, generally Monday, Tuesday, you got double sessions. So you got the girls in the morning, we'll have the youth in the afternoon. In between that, you're ticking off little bits and pieces that you might not get done throughout the week, little bits of admin tasks. The girls might have gym sessions that you've got to attend. Wednesday's generally a day off, using quotation marks. It's a day off for the players. It's a day off for some staff. I kind of use that day as like a bit of a reset day for the end of the week, just because you run out of time otherwise. Like, there's no time Monday, Tuesday to get everything done. Wednesday is kind of the day to finish off those little bits. Thursday, straight back into it, double session, girls in the morning, boys in the afternoon. And then a Friday morning is generally the girls, and I've got an assistant with the youth, so he takes the youth sessions on a Friday morning if I'm unable to get there. And then it could be Saturday or Sunday that we play for the women's team. Generally, it's a Friday night or a Saturday that the NPL boys are playing. So it's just running between the two and divvying up where you allocate the most time to which program, depending on what phase it's in, I think. And then Sunday's a bit of a recovery day for most of the players. Bit of face-to-face contact, and it's just getting set for the start of the new week.
And it goes again, obviously.
It does, yeah.
It stands to reason, doesn't it, that whether it's the head coach, Ed Andrioli, or coaches in the youth setups, that there'll be team goals put in place.
Yep.
Your dilemma, I guess, is to find that balance between helping achieve those team goals and addressing individual player needs. How do you go about that?
So I think from my perspective, ever since I've started with the youth, I've kind of taken the approach that winning is an important factor. We want to do well. We want the boys to do well. But the biggest part is them developing. Whether that's developing physically, we've got 15-year-olds that are training with the NPL. So it could be just them developing as individuals themselves. So my approach is obviously working with the players one-on-one, making sure that they're developing on the right time frame, both physically and mentally, for kind of the age group that they're going to sit in. And then once they get pushing into that 16, 17, 18-year-old bracket, you start focusing a little bit more heavily on the fact that they're playing an elite sport. They're in a professional environment. The objective is that they move up to the A-League squad. So once they've gone to that 17-year-old bracket, generally, that's when they're starting to train with the A-League squad. So a lot of the emphasis switches from maybe the development side of them as young adults to let's start pushing them into how they're going to compete against grown adults, especially if they're going to start playing A-League games. So there's a bit of back and forth between the two. It's like you really want to push to win games, but you don't want to overstress the individual enough that within 2 seasons they've just lost the love for playing football.
And do those points of emphasis change even within the confines of a single season itself?
Yeah, they can do, definitely. For example, this year our squad, it happens every year, but this year our squad's changed quite a lot. So we started the year with a good core group, and within the last, I'm going to say probably 2 months, about 6 of those players have actually moved up, and they've been playing with the A-League squad. They've signed scholarship deals with the A-League. There's some that have moved on and they've gone off to do other things with other professional teams. So our core group, where a handful of the boys were moving into that purely physical development phase, they've moved up, they've left, and we've got a new crop of players that are very, very young. So you kind of taking them from almost an under 16s framework where maybe they're exposed to 1 gym session a week. They're not exposed to a lot of physical components in terms of like playing against higher opposition. So initially it's switching to let's just see what they're like, kind of getting a gauge for the players themselves because we're limited for time in the first place, and then starting to move them into how do we put them into different buckets, where are we going to develop them, what do we focus on for the rest of this season, given that there's 5 weeks, 6 weeks left. What do we focus on in the off season, and then how do we structure that you've got different subgroups for next year, and especially next pre-season as to kind of where we slot them into and what we focus on in those little time frames.
Give us a little bit of an insight then, if you can, as to how that would work in terms of managing workloads across. You say you've got a young, up-and-coming, talented player entering the first team squad, as opposed to a seasoned veteran who might be at the peak of their career or just turning on the other side. There needs to be a bespoke individual program for each to maximise what they can achieve, doesn't there?
Yeah, for sure. So a lot of the approach that I take is figuring out where. So there's boys that we've worked with for a few seasons. We've got a pretty decent idea as to kind of what we can do with them, how we keep developing season on season. A prime example for some might be the new lads that come in. We're kind of starting from a baseline with those. If there's one that's kind of coming up through the ranks, he's moved up from, say, the under 18s. He could be 15, he could be 16 years old, but it's his first taste of youth football with United. Generally, you're going to take at least a couple of weeks to try and gauge kind of what their limit is. Training sessions are always different, so it's modifications to what the boys are doing. There's obviously going to be a lot of increased high-speed meters, accel, decels. They're coming up against older, more experienced, better players, regardless of like the age bracket that they sit in. So some of it just comes down to actually getting to know the player themselves, getting a bit of a background for what they've previously done and how we can support bringing them through. Obviously, at the start of the season, it's always easier to then develop them through that phase. There's a few older boys that we'd obviously be working with, and it's really more, I think from my perspective, it's really more down to the position that they play and where the coach wants to utilise them, what the coach wants to do as to how extensive we load each individual, and also what their training age has been previously. Like I was saying previously, there's boys that have been in the system for a couple of years now, and they're up to 18 years age. 18 years of age. We know where their thresholds are, and we know where we can push them to feasibly. And there's younger boys that we're less knowledgeable about what they're actually capable of doing. We don't want to get them to a certain level and go, this is kind of the benchmarking for your position based off of one of the lads that's recently left. But that benchmarking is just way too high for what they can actually tolerate, and then they just end up breaking down in the first season. So kind of starting them off in like a bit of a bottle run, always underestimating a little bit to an extent, just to get a gauge for kind of where they're at before we start pushing them a little bit harder. And like you're saying, if there's a young and upcoming talent that's coming through, the chances that they start training with the A-League, they're pretty high. So you've got to factor that in as well, and how we tolerate and program for what they're doing, as opposed to how the A-League's going to program for what they're doing as well, and just mirroring up the two so that you don't get a really talented 15, 16-year-old that just falls to pieces.
Of course, we're living in an age when technology is king, and especially if you operate in the world of pro sports, there's no end of different equipment, different software that's thrown at you from different sources. So you mentioned thresholds there for players. In your experience, what tech, what equipment do you find works best for you, and what methods do you then employ to get the most out of it?
So everybody uses it. GPS is obviously part and parcel of the role that you're in. A lot you can do with them if you're sticking to just some of your basics: total distance, how long players are out on the pitch for, max speeds, zonal thresholds, axial decels at like higher threshold as well, above 3 meters per second. For a lot of the benchmarking on pitch, that's just based off of some of the boys that we've had previously in the program that have done really well, and they've moved up to play in like the MLS or something like that. And that's purely based off of GPS metrics. So all the boys are individually categorized based off of certain thresholds for that player. But there's benchmarking it's more to give, I guess, guidelines for the coaching staff, like targets for the players to aspire to get to. This is where such and such got to. This is what they were accumulating per match. This is how many axial decels they were doing. This is how much high-speed meterage they were covering. And this is where they've progressed off to. So your benchmarking for that specific position is these players, effectively. We've got benchmarking through some of the VAD equipment that we've got at the club as well. Nord boards, do some testing with the Nord boards, counter movement jumps, like do an isometric mid-thigh pull, and you just start slotting the players into different buckets, again, using the term, as to kind of where they fall and what maybe they need the most attention to, if there's an area that's been lacking or something.
How important is it in your role that you're able to interpret it and then relay it in a fashion that the athletes themselves understand? Because we've all been young athletes at one point or another, and you just want to hit the quickest time, the most you can bench press. You want the top marks, whereas your job, I guess, is to say, hang on a minute, there's method to this madness along the line, and that isn't necessarily going to benefit you in the way that, people have watched the film Days of Thunder, won't they? When Robert Duvall turns around to Tom Cruise and says, right, you can drive as fast as you can, or you can drive my way, which you think is slower, but I guarantee the tyres will last longer and you'll finish the race. I guess
Yeah.
that's partly your role as well, isn't it?
Definitely. There are a lot of experienced, a lot of developed players. Prime example, pre-season testing. All the boys are trying to one up the next one that comes in. Trying the older ones that have been in the system a little bit longer, they're aware of what we're doing. Some of the younger boys, it might be their first season with us, they're not as conscious about the processes. You've got to then kind of break it down a little bit and paint a picture for where they need to be based off of their morphology, what age bracket they sit in, how long they've been training for, rather than trying to just jump as high as possible. And then getting concerned when you can't jump as high as the one prior to you. Then breaking it into the fact that there's a lot of different metrics that we can look at, and it's not purely just based off of how many centimeters you can get off the ground. There's a lot of other factors that go into it, and trying to convey to them, look, yeah, you might not be jumping 50 centimeters or 60 centimeters, but say your peak output per kilogram body weight is 20% better than what this player's is. There's other ways around it, I guess. And I think a big part is I've taken from a few coaches how to then display that and how to paint that picture for younger players specifically. The girls, women's team, most of them are experienced enough that they know what they're doing. They're not overly concerned with trying to beat the person prior or the person next to them. They're just trying to do as best as they can. And then we go from there, whereas the boys are it's always a competition. It's, did I run further than you? Was I quicker than you? Did I bench press?
I was going to say, are they always receptive to what you're trying to tell them?
They are. Once you can simplify it, yes. So probably an issue that I maybe had when I first came into the role, which probably trying to use some of the lingo or the talk that you'd use if you were speaking with another staff member in the same position. And then realizing I'm speaking to a 15-year-old that has absolutely no care for what I'm saying other than your jump was very good and you're within like the 90th percentile, and they go, oh, okay, yeah, cool. Like it's just, what number do I get?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to finish with several quickfire questions to try and sum up in a nutshell this aspect of the conversation. So we'll start with, in your opinion, what's the most underrated part of strength and conditioning in football?
Building relationships with players, I think. You can be as experienced or as knowledgeable as you like. I think the buy-in from the players, a lot of people would say this, but the buy-in from the players is the biggest part. You could have the best program in the world, and no one could care about it. But if you can get the players to buy into what you're doing, then I think you'll go a long way.
What's your favourite tool or metric when it comes to helping players progress?
Ooh. Excellent question.
I like to find one in every conversation we have.
I'm impartial to a force plate. I like force plates. I like being able to utilize that in different ways to get the best out of some players. Like we do, everyone, as most people would do it, but counter movement jumps uses a monitoring technique, but rather than just looking at how high a player can jump, which is all they care about, looking at like your eccentric braking force, and then maybe tailoring that into how well someone's recovered and how well we can stimulate them in that next session to push them further.
What's your go-to recovery strategy?
I've been very, very lucky with United. We've got access to a lot of really good spaces. We've recently started to have access to Sassy at their new facility. We've got access to Game Ready, which is a fantastic performance centre in Adelaide. Best one that the boys can do that costs them absolutely no money is legs elevated. You come in off of like a pre-season session, you might have done a lot of meters. They're trying to get on the Normatex to get some ice, like whatever it happens to be. But bang for buck in terms of probably how well the players are going to recover and how quickly they can recover, which costs you absolutely nothing, is just to get their legs elevated against the wall. Starts pushing everything back down, starts cycling it back out. Gives you a chance to sit down and have a chat with the players individually, get a gauge for how the session was, and if there's anything that needs to be addressed or adjusted come the next session. I think it doesn't cost anything.
And it's your favourite, because it helps the individual recover, but you mentioned there having that relationship with each individual, just chewing over the fat, you can get to know what's going on within the body.
Yeah, they can't go anywhere. They're stuck there for 7 to 10 minutes. So they're laying there for 7 to 10 minutes. They're not moving anywhere else. You can chat to them as much as you like, or you can not chat to them at all. But it gives you that opportunity. It gives a lot of the time you don't have maybe those one-on-one conversations, especially to that depth with players. You don't have the time allocation. Whereas if you've got a handful of players, you've got 5 players that are just laying there with their legs elevated, they can't go anywhere else. You've got that couple of minutes to just have a chat with them quickly.
We'll wrap up, Luke, with what do you think is the biggest myth you've come across when it comes to football fitness?
Oh, biggest myth. I don't know if it's a myth, but I feel like it's been a topic previously, but a lot of people just putting into the emphasis on just raw numbers, and I started that way. And then as the seasons have progressed, the years have progressed, shifted away from the fact that you could just display numbers, whether they're GPS or they're testing metrics. You can just display numbers and you can paint a picture from that. But I think contextually, you've got to obviously view what players are doing. You've got to watch footage. You've got to observe the training sessions themselves. I don't know if it's not a myth, but it's something that I've come to realize maybe isn't the be all and end all of how many meters per minute did somebody cover, and then not contextually taking into that how the player actually performed.
Yeah, it's the context in the scenario that gives you the real information when you scratch beneath the surface.
It is.
Look, Luke, I've loved this conversation. It's been fantastic. As I say, I know you've got an awful lot on your plate down there these days at Adelaide United. So on behalf of myself and our listeners on the Science for Sport podcast, thanks for your time. If they want to stay across the work you're doing and how Adelaide United get on when the season cranks back into action, how can they do so across social media?
To be honest, I'm probably most active on LinkedIn. I don't really use other social media platforms for that much. But yeah, LinkedIn, always have to have a chat on LinkedIn, always happy to connect with people on there. Met some fantastic people through LinkedIn as well. And then social media for like Adelaide United, so Instagram would be the place for that if you want to keep up with what United's doing.
And when does your season start again?
The women's season will start on the pre-season will start on the 1st of September. Our actual season is it's lost me now. It's in October, end of October.
Some time to prepare. There's
a bit of time. I've got some shifting around to do in terms of like the mindsets from finishing with the youth and then picking up with the girls.
Well, listen, thanks once again, and best of luck with the seasons to come.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Unlocking sports science to push the limits of human potential. This is the Science for Sport podcast.
Many thanks to Luke Harris for taking the time to join us down there in Adelaide in Australia and sharing his thoughts on how you do handle the individual needs of different athletes within multiple teams in the same organisation. And if you want to find out more about different methodology as regards strength and conditioning coaching, you can do so by going to our website, www.scienceforsport.com. And if you enjoyed our chat with Luke, then please do feel free to share this episode with a coach, a colleague, an athlete, or a friend. As I frequently point out at this juncture, the more downloads we get, the easier it becomes for us to attract top-name athletes or people at the very leading edge of their profession. Well, that is just about all for this week's episode. Thanks once again for listening, and I look forward to the next time you can join me on the Science for Sport podcast.
Subscribe to the Science for Sport podcast now, wherever you listen to your podcasts. For more insights, resources, and to join the Academy, visit scienceforsport.com and connect with us on social media by searching for @ScienceForSport. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.